So by the time I was old enough to get a part-time job, my mum was like, okay, you're old enough to go and get a job now for Saturday work. Take your CV into all the shops around town and see if you can get some work. I came home and she said, oh, how many places did you step into and who's got your letter and your CV? Oh, two. What? Why only two? There were only two record shops in Leicester.
That was a clip from today's guest. Everybody, welcome back to the show. Today's guest is someone that I have kind of known for years. Like, we actually have never spoken outside of today, but I followed their career and just seen how they represent their ideas online and been super, super impressed. And also just like kind of a cool professional story. Lots to get out of it. Before we get to it, please subscribe to the podcast. It is a huge difference maker. So if you could hit that button, I'd really appreciate it. This is One Step Beyond. Kathi, welcome to the show.
Hey, Aram, thanks for having me. Great to be here and to chat with you at last.
Yeah, it's so wild how we have kind of been in each other's circle for many, many years, but really never known each other, but have been also like interacting with each other on LinkedIn and like different platforms. So it's great to like connect in person.
Yeah, it's great to speak with you, Aram. After, like you said, we've been chatting on LinkedIn. I've been following the Cadence Leadership podcast and all that good stuff. And I've really loved, following along, getting a load of tips and tricks. But, the cherry on top is the fact that a lot of what I've learned from your podcast has also come from a bit of the DIY punk sort of mindset that many of us grew up with as teenagers. So this to me is like leadership, the music element, being resourceful, doing something with, very little and making things happen. And yeah, it's great to be here and to chat with you.
Heck yeah. All right. So to start, for the uninitiated, for those who don't know, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, well, my name's Kathi Ramsey. I currently reside in New Jersey with my husband and my Iron Maiden obsessed stepson. As you can tell, I'm not a native. I'm originally from the UK. I was born and raised in Leicester in the Midlands. Had a great music scene as a teenager, exposed me to punk, hardcore, and just being a music obsessive. Yeah, that passion for music I was one of those teenagers who only wanted to work in music. So I started out at an independent record store when I was 16, worked there for a number of years throughout college, and then that really sort of kick-started my career. I've enjoyed over 20 years in the music industry, and that's ranged from distribution, independent labels, major labels, and now my current situation is I've just wrapped up running Warner Music Group's college marketing program, Warner Music U, where I've had the privilege of leading approximately 30 18 to 24-year-olds who were, I was in their shoes at one point in my career. So it's been a real privilege to be able to mentor and coach them and provide opportunities for them to get their own head start in the business. So yeah, in a nutshell, that was a long answer, but I'm someone with a passion for music who's always worked in music aside from a pivot into teaching and mentoring. And I care deeply about the next generation of music industry and marketing professionals.
Heck yeah. Awesome. Lots to unpack there. Let's start with a question I'm always curious about when anyone works in the industry. Why? Why do you work in the music industry?
I can imagine sometimes you hear the answer, I'm a glutton for punishment. No, absolutely not. No, for me, it was just a no-brainer. I grew up so influenced by my home situation where my parents really valued music in our home. So, if you can imagine like 4-year-old Kathi with her first ever 7-inch and record player, and my dad every week would buy my mum a 7-inch from the newsagent like to get, he'd get the Sunday papers and a 7-inch single, which in the early 80s in England, that would have been about like less than £1 to pay for. So, you know, it was like I saw this music sort of being exchanged as a love language. And in our house, it was like, yeah, the record collection was really important. And then as a kid, it was just, you know, music really spoke to me, even just at a very young age, to the point where I would love telling my friends about a Belinda Carlisle song or the Go Go's or whatever. You know, I was like 7 when I was talking about this music and feeling that passion. So by the time I was old enough to get a part-time job, my mum was like, okay, you're old enough to go and get a job now for Saturday work. Take your CV into all the shops around town and see if you can get some work. I came home and she said, oh, how many places did you step into and who's got your letter and your CV? Oh, 2. What? Why only 2? There were only 2 record shops in Leicester. So I was lucky enough I was like 15 when I started, and I wasn't even old enough to serve the customers at that point. So I was literally cleaning shelves through the Christmas period, putting out the display covers, and just sort of like being, wow, I'm surrounded by music. This is amazing. I'm seeing what people are buying. I see if they like that artist, they also buy this and this and this and this. And then keep in mind, this was like 1995, so definitely pre-internet. Eventually, I was old enough to serve the customers. I stayed there for 6 years or so and started a punk and hardcore section in the store, which was my baby. And it was just, yeah, just working, being surrounded by other music obsessives, the customers as well, being able to recommend music to them. I was never one of those high fidelity people that would be snobby. It would be, oh my God, you have to check this out. This is coming from America. You've got to hear this band. So yeah, I think that's why that's at the core of it. It's that passion. And I still have that passion for discovering new artists and being able to talk about it and come up with marketing ideas and think, okay, who would love this artist? How do we reach them? And then also navigating all the changes in the business as well and how we consume music. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm still here. Don't be fooled by the records. I have embraced every format throughout all these years. So when, you know, Spotify was launched in Europe, it was like, this is amazing, because not only I'm not going to stop buying CDs and vinyl and whatever, but now I've got access to so much other stuff as well. It became more of a supplemental way of listening to or discovering music. I didn't have to just go and buy something. I could now explore, and yeah, this is my passion. This is what I love.
Yeah, clearly, totally. So I'm going to ask you a really like impossibly broad question to take it in any direction you want. And the reason I'm going to ask you this is because you've worked in so many different parts of the music industry. So
Mhm.
just imagine just a layperson who doesn't really understand how the music industry works. Just in the most general terms, how does the music industry work, operate as a business?
Yeah. So, I mean, my expertise, although I've had a varied sort of path, my expertise really is focused on the recorded music side of the industry.
Mhm.
So let's be clear, the live music side is a whole other beast. So in recorded music, you can think, well, imagine at the moment we have the major labels. We have Warner, we have Universal, we have Sony. In the older days, there used to be more of those labels. You know, the market was spread a little more. And then, of course, we have like countless smaller independent labels of all shapes and sizes and genres that they specialize in. So, I mean, my path was really forged through the entry point being really punk, anything heavy, that kind of genre. That's what carried me through my career. So within that niche, because after working at the record store, I landed a job as a label manager at an independent music distributor. Now, music distributor, to make things a little more complex for anyone who's not necessarily familiar with the business, just think like a wholesaler. They have a whole vast array of record labels that they work with. and they make sure that if the product is physical product, it gets shipped to the stores. Well, it's a little more complex than that. You have to sell it into the stores and have the marketing reasons for the stores to take the stock. And then with the digital releases, they make sure that those releases are all available on all of the usual digital service providers such as Apple Music, Spotify, Deezer, all of those big ones. So in distribution, that was a really interesting area to be in, because in that role as label manager, I got to work with at least 30 independent record labels, mostly from the US, such as now Aram, you'll know these, like Revelation. I was their label manager for the UK, and Fat Wreck, which is another punk label. But then also European labels such as Germany's Nuclear Blast, which is a heavy hitter in rock and metal. So, yeah, and then of course lots of UK small independent labels as well. But mostly that distributor specialized in punk and hardcore and metal. So I was firmly in that niche. So what I'm speaking on today is you can kind of replicate it to, indie, it works similarly regardless of genre. There are specialist companies out there that, focus on a niche genre. So there's the distribution side of it. And then also to illustrate how the business works, I will use my career path because it kind of goes quite linear here. So if you imagine on this end of the scale is the record stores and the fans. And then on the very other end of the scale, we've got the artists and the music. So I started really customer facing, interacting with fans, people who bought the records and whatever else. Now, my next step in the business went into distribution. So, in other words, another step, very tiny step closer to the music, where distribution would be responsible for getting those products into the stores, whether they're physical or digital. They are a little step further away from the consumer. And then my career going into independent labels, major labels, that's another step closer to the actual music, because with roles like marketing, product management, international product management, in those roles, I was interacting not only with the distributors or the other companies that would get our music out there to the world for commercial release, but I was also interacting with the artist managers, the artists themselves, the A&R teams. So in essence, that was as close to the actual source, the music, the art that I have got to in my career. I am not a musician. I am not an artist. I love all this other stuff as much as I love the art itself. So I think that might be the easiest way I personally can explain the business in that sense.
Yeah. The reason I ask is like, it's simple, but also hopelessly complex. I like how you described music, like how you saw it expressed in your family as a love language. And if we go with that idea, like people love music, it expresses something for them. Sometimes like a song that someone else wrote is the best way that you can express how you feel about something to another person, like, mixtapes and all those kinds of things. And then on
Oh,
the
yeah.
other end, so you've got the consumer of it, like the fan, the believer. And then on the other end, you've got the artist who's creating something that's like meaningful for them. But so that's like the simplest way of looking at it. If you've got these two parties, you've got the creator and the people who are like hungry for the creation. But in between,
Yes.
you've got this like expanding Oreo cookie of complex webs of like how you get from the artist to the person. And
Mm-hmm.
something I often say is that, like, for musicians, the easiest thing in the world to do is to write a great song. And it's like writing a great song is the easiest part of putting out a record, because it's the one thing you can control is writing a great song. But if you write a great song, and let's say you write like 10 other or 12 other great songs, so you make an album, that's the easiest thing, because then you have to record it and you have to hope not just the recording goes well and that the engineer knows what they're doing, but you get the right takes in the studio. But then you have to mix it, and then you have to like mix the thing and hope the person who's mixing it knows what they're doing. Then you have to master it, and you got to hope the person who's mastering knows what they're doing. Then you have to hope that the person who's doing the art like gets the record and can kind of create something really cool. That's a whole beast. But then when you hand it into the label, if you're lucky enough to have a label. But then if you have a label, you got to hope that they are able to schedule it at the right time so that it's going to work for like, it's coming out at the right time where it's not going to be overshadowed by other releases. It's going to support like how you can tour on the record. And then you've got to have the right distributors who like market it the right way. It's like, it's so complex to get something from you creating it to someone else that really at the end of the day, when someone's like, I can't believe so and so wrote such a great song. It's like, yeah, that's actually literally the easiest part of it. Although it's hard, there are so many things that could go wrong from when
Hmm.
you finish writing that song to when someone actually purchases that music. And
Yeah.
that's why the music industry, I think, is like often not really understood because it's like so complex. Even though the
Hmm.
idea of it is like I create it, you listen to it, is so simple.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's also like if you imagine from, well, the artist's perspective, you're at the point that you've sort of handed it into the label. It must be so nerve-wracking because you've completely relinquished control to uh, hundreds and hundreds of variables. Will you even have the right team working on it? Will the staff care? How do you make sure that you have the right team when it's not necessarily up to you? So it's and that's a really it's an interesting way that a lot of independent labels differentiate themselves as well, is to how artist friendly they say they are, and then actually are, and live up to that too. So yeah, it is a real minefield. We're only touching on the recorded music side. As I say, live music side of the business, entirely different beast. But obviously there is an overlap there because, like you say, you need to make sure you've got your record available. If you're touring, you want to be able to sell it direct to your fans when you're on the road. And then the other part of the industry that we, would be a whole separate conversation, of course, is publishing. Now, that is another minefield that many of us, are still constantly learning about. So, it's there's so many organizations involved. Yeah, there's a lot for an artist to take on here and to at least grasp who the main players are and how things function.
So you're continued like because I can just see it as you're talking about it, your continued like belief and passion in music is like really really apparent, which is interesting after having been in the industry so long. So Chris Wren, who runs Bridge 9 Records, when he was on the podcast, but also he had said this to me like many times throughout our friendship. Chris Wren never drew his salary from Bridge 9. He always drew his salary from his other business ventures. And
Yeah.
I asked him about it when we were like quite a bit younger. And I was like, dude, why don't you just make Bridge 9 your whole thing and don't worry about all these other things? And he's like, honestly, man, I don't want to earn my living off of the label, because once I earn my living off the label, I have to start making decisions based on what's going to make money instead of what I like.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
always thought that was such a cool way of looking at it. Like the idea that if you're not financially tied to something, you can make decisions just like, I don't care if this sells like 1,000 copies or 10,000 copies or 20,000. I just want to see
Yep.
this exist because I like it. So, having been someone who's been like professionally involved in music for so long, how have you been able to maintain your passion while also like dealing with the realities of finding things and working on things that are going to sell?
Yeah, I think in that respect, fully appreciate it because, it becomes, there are things that I've done as well that have been a pure labor of love, and you don't want to have to make compromises. And you want the art to be the art. And that's also why I love the punk and the hardcore scene, because it's all about sort of, well, actually, this is going to come out when it comes out because I'm putting all this love into this release. So, yeah, absolutely. When you're working at a label, though, it's so different because everyone is on a strict deadline, and that goes all the way to the artist, to the point where that they need to deliver the master, they need to deliver the all of the what they call the label copy, or the credits information for the royalties, and the not to mention the artwork. So maintaining that headspace, I mean, for me, I've been very fortunate because I have, in essence, I've been a worker bee. I haven't put my own money into these companies. I've been a salaried employee. So there is that. But then at the end of the day, there is always that relationship that exists between the art and the commerciality. So, I mean, yeah, during my time as international product manager at Roadrunner International, of course, I had to look at things with a real commercial lens because even though it's not my money, I still had to make sure that we were doing the bands, the artists themselves, we were doing them justice and they were able to grow their careers and sell more than they had previously, and so on. So, in that aspect, I mean, I'm glad I've never really been in a position where I've had to cut corners. I haven't had to compromise. Um, but instead, what happens is you have the conversations with the artist or with the artist management quite often, is, most of the time. And you just say, hey, I want you to know that if we do add this extra element to the vinyl pressing, the cost will go up by this, and that could have this the following impact on how many will ship or how many the stores will be able to take. So yeah, in my experience, it's been all about communication, so that the people who really are in charge of the arts are able to understand or have the influence in the decisions that are being made, but having them on board to understand that that we have the same goal of making sure there is a commercial success to what is being worked on and released.
I'm real interested in your take on this. So for a lot of forms of music, like the idea that music is like a commodity that's intended to be sold so that people, as many people as possible, can hear your music. And, you know, ideally you'd partner with something like a major label and management companies and all these things. So you get on the biggest
Mhm.
festivals and biggest platforms ever. That would be like the majority of music. But then there's this like weird inversion in punk and hardcore where it's like, now like if you go down certain routes you're like selling out and you're like conforming, you're doing all this stuff and you're doing it so that you can like get in front of people. You live in an interesting cross section where you come from like punk and hardcore, but you've also worked in like things that are like, no, like music is a commercial venture. So what are your thoughts on that kind of punk approach of like, no, if you try and get out in front of as many people as possible and you take more commercial routes, that you're like, I don't know, like quote unquote a sellout?
Yeah, this is the age old discussion,
Mhm.
being called a sellout. And I mean, yeah, I my view is if let's say a punk band really does sort of like start blazing a path and the other punk bands haven't blazed in the past and they somehow smash that ceiling, because there is a ceiling. I've seen the numbers over the years and I pretty much know what that is. um and yet they somehow do not alienate their original fan base, their original community that they came from. And I think community is probably the most important word there. If they're not alienating their community where they started out, I think it's amazing. It's fantastic. It's like fair play. This is so cool for you. You're playing music that you love for as long as you love doing it. You get to go over the world. You get to play in front of so many different cultures, different audiences, and you're known worldwide. I mean, I think that it's truly, truly amazing. Um, the part that I find difficult to let go of is when you get some bands that do kind of make it and get accused of being sold out, because they somehow have neglected their core. They've forgotten their roots. And I think you know what I mean by that. Yeah, to me, that doesn't sit very well. And that's probably teenage, snobby punk Kathi coming out at its essence, is like, yeah. Because, I was that teenager saying, oh, they're sold out. But then on the other hand, I'm like, wait a minute, just because I thought this was my music, it doesn't mean that it's not zero sum if like the average Kerrang reader was also listening to it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Um, so yeah, I think, I don't know. But then at the same time, as you say, I'm speaking from that strange perspective of where I've been on both paths. I've been on the art for art's sake path and why I love it, and that we can exist outside of the music industry, and yet at the same time be involved in the music industry and take slightly larger bands to the next step as well.
I'll give you a few examples of stuff that's inspired me. Like as an example, Sick of It All, I think is I don't know if I'm not sure if they get the credit that they deserve for being a band that has stayed largely independent. I know that they did some like I believe major label or at least like subsidiary major label stuff, but they've essentially just been like an independent band for all these years. And I believe that they're the first band that cracked the code of how to be like a legitimately big band where you live off of your band while also staying totally in their roots. I've had the chance to like see them a bunch of times. I've listened to them all these times. I spent some time with the guys. I hope that they get the credit that they deserve, and also like shout out to Lou. I hope your health is on the mend there. But
Yeah.
that band really kind of was the first band that cracked the code, I think. And then from there, there's
Yeah.
been many other bands who have gone. I think it's a band like AFI where it's just like, yeah, went on to like legit
Mhm.
majors and did some like they kind of had the experience where like they had like breakthrough release and then a really solid follow-up release and then like
Mhm.
DreamWorks went and they kind of got screwed on that next release and like but they managed to like keep putting out cool records and keep themselves a viable going concern.
Mhm.
And also it's like they never lost touch with their fan base. Like everybody loves AFI. Like even if you don't like necessarily like the music, you respect what they've
Mhm.
done if you're from punk and hardcore.
Yeah, that's so true.
Well, and then you've got like a modern example like Turnstile, which is like I
Mhm.
think the biggest hardcore band that has ever existed ever, and
Yes.
I think is continuing to go, but also is like totally real and like totally accessible, like real hardcore band. So those
Yeah.
are just some things that I have like ideas that I have of bands that I think have like managed to do it super well. And of course, there's so many
Mhm.
bands that I think have gotten like kind of shit canned the way that you're talking about, where it's like, man, they're sellouts. It's like, I don't know, like I don't know these
Uh,
people. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to do your art for a living if you've
yeah.
got the goods, if you're like you're actually good enough to do that.
No, exactly. I think the examples you've given are absolutely perfect. Number one, well, Sick of It All. I mean, come on. Once you're a fan of Sick of It All, you're never lost. You don't ever feel sort of that the music isn't for you anymore. You know what I mean? And they're such road dogs. They're amazing. There's no such thing as a bad Sick of It All live show. And it is pretty amazing because, like you said, they've stayed true to themselves, and then they have toured the hell out of their lives. They've just gone on the road, and the live performance has spoken for itself. So I'm with you. I totally hope that younger kids that do get into Sick of It All because they happen to see them at a festival in Europe somewhere. I really hope they do. You know, look back, trace the legacy. How long have they been around? Like, why do the guys in Sick of It All do what they do? Because they're just the epitome of hardcore, really, and doing it all on their own terms. So I think that was an amazing example. Turnstile, well, when I was talking about bands that really shattered that glass ceiling, that's who I had in mind. Very, such a unique situation for them. But I would love to see that happen to bands such as High Vis, who have been on the up and up and up and up over the past few years. I think they sort of come across as the kind of band that wouldn't neglect their community. They wouldn't neglect their fan base, and it would be sort of like, growth, depending on whether that's what they want. Of course, this is always a question: is I want to be successful. What does that actually mean? It's such a subjective question. um so it's up to the band. Like, what is it they're aiming for? How big do they want to be? And then the AFI mention, I do remember maybe 5 minutes of them sort of like exploding, where there was a bit of a, oh, they've sold out, and then, oh wait, the music's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
also like I'd say for AFIs like stayed so like community minded and like like I've been at shows where
Yeah.
like Davey Havoc will like just jump up and like sing for some like do a cover with some punk band. Like it's cool. Like they're just like a real band. It does feel like there has been a cooling of some of those kind of like more negative, like me, this is just for us kind of attitudes because bands
Mhm.
have gotten like legitimately bigger. They've been like again Sick of It All, AFI, now Turnstile. have kind of stretched the realm of what it means to be authentic while also like kind of getting at higher levels.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, like how have you kept, because I could imagine you've probably had many moments in your music career, and I could be wrong here, where maybe you've seen disappointing things happen as a result of like business decisions. So like if that's accurate for you, like how have you kept your passion for music going then?
Um, Bouncing back, I think, especially like as I've got older, I've definitely, I mean, I put effort into it in the past to sort of become more resilient. So it's sort of like, I don't know, as I'm like now in my 40s, if something has sort of like been disappointing, or I've thought, oh, I wish that had gone another way for that artist, or, you know, I don't know, I seem to not dwell on things as much and just think, well, that's a blip, that's what happened. Yeah, and just sort of bouncing back. I'm not sure if that answers your question around.
No, no, it does. It does. All right, let's talk about you specifically. I know that it's wrapped up now, but I'd love to hear about this program that you've been running.
Yes. So, as I mentioned, Aram, I've just finished wrapping up the Warner Music U program, which was Warner Music Group's 18 to 24-year-old demographic marketing program. So, what that means is if we're looking at record labels and how they, all the different ways that you can promote your music to different audiences, Warner Music U was basically the channel for artists to reach the 18 to 24-year-old demographic, such as through college campuses in the US, through college radio, through events that were held on campus, such as artist themed parties. And, we even had reps who would set up events where it was, let's say, a gym class of some kind or a spin class, and they would make it artist themed. So if you can imagine like a Charlie XCX spin class, that kind of thing. And the commercial existence for Warner Music U was basically to offer the Warner Music Group labels, Atlantic, Warner Records, Elektra, to offer them the potential to reach these young people on college campuses, and also in the community. So, on the other hand, though, the way that I also viewed the Warner Music U program while I was running it for the past couple of years, it's like, okay, there's 50% a commercial reason for the existence of college marketing. How it benefits the labels, how it benefits the artists, especially the developing artists who are trying to get to the next step and grow their audience. On the other hand, the other 50% of the importance of the program to me was the fact that we were able to identify talented young professionals who were really passionate about getting into the music business, and therefore, were open to being mentored and coached, and basically willing to absorb everything they possibly could while working for Warner Music Group part-time throughout their studies. So I always saw my role as sort of having two main purposes. Number one, the commercial reason for the existence of the program and to help the developing artists. And then number two, the opportunity to mentor and coach the music industry's next generation of talent. Now, a part of my career that we didn't really mention actually, because we were so focused on the music stuff, while I was living and working in the Netherlands, I pivoted into education. It was such an opportunity that came up in such a random way that it felt like the universe just sort of said, this is what you have to be doing right now. So, long story short, I was teaching international business and marketing at a college in the Netherlands, still involved in music on the side. And with that experience of teaching for about 7 years, doing that work, I realized that, I wanted to give back, and for whatever it was worth, here's everything I've learned. Maybe it's useful to somebody. So, and that was an aspect of myself that I hadn't really figured out until I sort of explored the possibility of teaching and then actually doing it. So, being hired to run the Warner Music U program, of course, to me was like a complete bullseye, because it meant not only could I impart my couple of decades long experience across all those different types of jobs that I've had to the next gen for what it's worth, I was also able to hang on to what I really loved about my old job in teaching, which was mentoring, coaching, listening to what that individual person's goals were, and then being able to sort of bring some different perspectives to the table and also ask them some smart questions to help them figure out what they wanted to do. So it's just felt like a real privilege to do that. And as I mentioned, I've just wrapped up running the program for Warner Music Group, and there is a new chapter on the horizon. And whatever I do next, I will not be letting go of what, I'm really paying attention to the feeling on this one, and that is the importance of helping the next generation.
All right. So very often, and for anyone listening who doesn't know, so like I work as a executive coach, and I run an organization that's focused on helping leaders and their teams grow, organizations build great culture, and all that kind of stuff. So basically, my day to day, I'm spending my day like coaching people or working with organizations. I can say that in that kind of work, that work of like coaching or mentoring or anything along those lines, there's all these things where I learn a lot about myself. Where either I'm speaking with someone, I'm like, oh man, this is like just me 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Or, oh, this person's coming up against something that I dramatically like did great at and I can actually help them here. Or that I totally ate it and did terrible at. And like, again, I've learned stuff from that. So I'm always kind of learning things about myself through working with other people and helping other people achieve things. So based on your work as mentoring these young people thinking about like their next steps into the music industry, what have you learned about yourself?
Yeah. Well, what I've learned about myself, especially, is, and I've worked hard on it actually, is to let go of perfectionism and being hard on myself. Those are two real crucial elements, because if I look at, say, my teenage years, my 20s, my early 30s, I was just so go, 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 go constantly, that I didn't even reflect. I didn't look at sort of like, am I, are there better ways I can handle things? Can I be a little more sophisticated in how I deal with people? Is it always about the goal? Does it matter if things go wrong? Why am I so averse to things going wrong? Is it because I'm afraid of failure? So I've been through a lot of these sort of like reflection moments for myself over the years. And in fact, this actually goes back not only during my time at Warner Music U and leading the teams of young people, but also during the 7 years of teaching directly before that. Because I think all of that together. So basically, the past decade, I've learned a lot about myself, because young people are always a mirror. Like you say, I love that you recognize it yourself as well, that you're like, oh, yeah, I've overcome this before myself. I know sort of how this feels to fall down, get back up again. So with being hard on myself, I think what I learned was good enough is sometimes good enough. But then it was also a real eye opener to me when, after doing some reflection, I realized that if I hold myself to such a high standard unforgivably, this is not good for people I manage, because they're going to be held to an impossible standard as well. So, with my role at Warner Music U, with one direct report who was previously a college rep, and then 30 reps all around the US who were college students, I made sure that, especially with that close relationship with my direct report, that I would give a lot of grace, and that I could see, with her being a go-getter, I see myself in her, like how I was back then as well. So I've been that person, that voice. Even, I don't, whether she took it on board or not is none of my business, but I wanted to let her know that it was okay to make mistakes, and that this is all part of the process. And don't beat yourself up about it, because you're doing great, and the fact that you care so much is the sign that you're doing amazingly. Her results were always consistently good. And yet there would be the moments that she would be sort of like, oh. So again, that's been such an amazing feeling for me, because I felt that I've been able to really um, not only see my own growth, which is wonderful, but able to help someone else. And maybe someday they'll be, oh yeah, I remember learning this lesson and I didn't get it at the time, but I get it now. Right? Yeah, I want to just sort of share any sort of ways that you can deal with these bumps along the road, really. And then another thing, Aram, I would also say is, now this was more of a active learning, where when I was going through my teacher training, I was introduced to all these different theories of human motivation. That was a massive light bulb going off. So there's also, obviously the hierarchy of needs and from Maslow, but especially Daniel Pink and his autonomy, mastery, and purpose, the AMP model. That's something I've held close to my chest, and also really made sure I've used and lived on a daily basis ever since learning that in the early days of teaching. So autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I mean, the essence of it is that humans are motivated by, let's say they're in a job that offers them those three aspects. So, autonomy meaning don't micromanage, mastery, the person that you're managing, or if it's, perhaps it's yourself, that you can master the role that you're working in. That gives you the confidence. And then the purpose, the sense of purpose. So we're edging into Simon Sinek territory with what is, discovering your why. So I've been coaching my reps as well, my team, with sort of that in mind, to explain that no, I'm not going to micromanage you. No, I'm not going to tell you how to market these artists. I'm simply going to say, here's the goal. How you get there is up to you. And actually, because I respect you and I respect your ideas, it's up to you. If you get stuck and you don't know how to do this, I will happily sit alongside you and coach you along. But ultimately, I want you to come up with your own creative ways of getting the job done. And I'm here to support and facilitate. So those are, a couple of things I've really learned about my leadership style as well, is sort of not so laissez-faire or, completely hands-off, but at least keep being conscious of it and knowing that people are motivated if they're given the autonomy, the chance to master, and to have that sense of purpose as well.
I love that you brought up the Dan Pink stuff. I always find that, just from a perspective of psychology, very interesting. And I agree with most parts of it very well. But there's like other things I kind of like not poke holes in, but I think it requires, it all sounds very nice. And then in practicality, it requires like really diligent leadership.
Yes.
But let me ask you a question that is kind of a sidebar to that. You've now been in the industry, I believe you said over 20 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were there periods where you just had to grind harder than anybody else and it required like a lot of personal sacrifice?
Yes. And it really, I struggled with it. I've been in and out of the burnout thing. Absolutely. And all of the emotions that come with that. So certainly with the Roadrunner job, for example, that was sort of like a massive peak in my career, where I'd moved to the Netherlands. So I was living in a completely different culture, different country. Loved it because, I'd already built an affinity with life over there and knew people in the music scene and all that. And then suddenly I get this new job that really takes me to the next level. So if we're talking football, or I mean soccer, whatever we want to call it, the one with the round ball, it was like going from first division to Premier League versus what how my career had gone so far. So it was like, wow, this is a big step up. International product manager, overseeing the marketing and promotion for all of the artists that were signed, and overseeing it for not just within Europe, but working with all countries around the world outside of the US and Canada. So that was big league, big job, and it was fantastic. There were so many different hats that I wore in that role. So as a product manager in the music business, you're often sort of overseeing the process from start to finish of, let's say, an album cycle or anything to do with that artist. As international product manager, yes, I was doing that. And then also you have the added factor of all the different countries that are involved as well. Varying markets, all the markets in Europe are different to each other. They're different languages, different trends, different methods of consumption. Then add on to that, let's say, difference between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Add on Asia, add on Japan, Australia, UK, Germany, France, all over the place. So that was interesting because I was sort of like, that typical workaholic. It was the time of the BlackBerry. So I would wake up in the morning, my inbox was filled with messages from Japan and Australia. Then it would be UK and mainland Europe. And then US would wake up, New York, then LA. And then I wouldn't be sleeping because, oh, I've started getting messages from Japan already. So it was really an interesting lesson to learn, to figure out, okay, how do I work effectively, knowing that I've got this BlackBerry, which back then it wasn't even a smartphone, it was basically an email machine.
Yeah.
And you sort of like, you could happily not sleep at all and just be kept busy. So that was a really good lesson for me to learn was, oh, how do I manage? How do I actually cope with such a high volume of tasks, loads of different plate spinning, working with so many different artists that were at different stages of their career, different release cycles, touring in all different time zones, all that kind of thing. And then add on to that, not just the artist facing stuff, but strategically helping the company with the decisions that were being made on the ground at the distributors or at in the other offices where Roadrunner had staff. So there was a lot going on. I hold it so dearly because it really felt like that job was the making of me, because I, I kind of didn't know how to deal with a lot of it in the end. Well, no, by the end I did. And then the stress factor, though. So there was all that, which is all well and good. But the massive stress factor was knowing that I took the job, knowing that the owner of Roadrunner was going to be selling it at some point to the highest bidder. So when I started working at Roadrunner International, that was the headquarters for the label. It's Dutch by origin. So I was there, and the Warner Music Group actually owned 74% of the label already. So I knew from the outset, and I loved the fact that my boss at the time was really transparent about this. I knew that the lifespan of that role for me would have been 3 to 5 years. I was there for about 5 years in the end, because the part of my remit as well was to make sure that Roadrunner was a real going concern for the highest bidder, that we could prove that Roadrunner could A&R, so source artists and develop them and break them. So we needed to make sure we had that kind of evidence, and that, we could get the same or more sales with less marketing spend. So I really had to wear some careful hats there, because I had to be that person. Although, at the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned I didn't have to really cut corners with anything to do with the artists, thank goodness. But then when you're going out and looking at how things are marketed on the other end, I had to be that person going to the distributor and saying, sorry, nope, you got to slash your promo budget here. We've got to pull this one back. What else can you do where you'll still get the same amount of sales? So having all that to learn in a relatively short amount of time, and then knowing that I was also working to the demise of my job, because success would have looked like the company being sold to Warner, probably, or even maybe Universal, or, So hooray, we did it. We got the company sold. Clearly it worked. But then what's going to happen with these mergers and acquisitions. 9 times out of 10, the offices will all be shuttered and everything would get absorbed into the existing infrastructure, in this case at Warner, who bought the label. So yeah, it was the making of me, Aram. It really was, because there was just so much going on. and then learning about how the corporate side of things worked as well. But then having to be objective about it, being like, well, I know I'm working to be out of a job in this one.
Yeah, I love what you said there, and the reason I'm pushing on this a little bit, I think the AMP philosophy is great. Like it's not a concern, nor I think it's totally practical when leaders find like what are the ways that you motivate teams and individuals to grow and do better at their jobs. Where
Mhm.
I always want to push when people bring that up in the podcast, so not just you, anyone on the podcast, is typically I find that people latch can latch onto ideas, or can explain things with ideas like AMP, and then the audience might not hear that there's actually like a total diligence of leadership that follows with those things. And
Mhm.
really specifically, like the reason I asked about the idea of, or asked about like, have you ever had to really like grind in your career? One of the things that I don't know, I wouldn't say I have a concern about. I think it's just the interneting is like, probably 2018 and on, there's been all this like work should only be this like creative, wonderful experience for you where your deepest creativity is unleashed and that it's like, well, yeah, I mean, sure, that's great, but it sounds like you're talking about the perfect job, and very, very few people are going to work in a
Mhm.
perfect job. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't aspire to that. To get to that usually requires a huge amount of sacrifice and really hard work of working crappy jobs, or working jobs where you have a great boss but maybe you get paid like crap, or jobs where you get paid
Mhm.
great but you have like a terrible boss, or you're doing something
Mhm.
that you don't particularly like focusing on, like what you're focusing on isn't of interest to you, but you really want to be a part of the industry, or like maybe the team you're on sucks, but like you like what
Mhm.
you're doing, and like all of these different combinations. I I find it that like the kind of like almost like online career conversation seems to be like every human being should find themselves in this like deeply meaningful job that they love, that they get paid well, that your boss is amazing, your team is incredible, and it's like just frankly that's just not reality. I have I think I think it's very appealing to talk about that stuff online, but in reality, I don't think most people are experiencing that. So if I think about like the AMP model, it's like, you know, I don't want anyone to get micromanaged, but I will say as like a business owner, there are times where you certainly have to micromanage people, where you actually have to
Mhm.
get in and be like really focused on what's going on and help them get to that next space. So I want people to have the freedom to do it whatever they want up until the point where they can't do it, and then you got to help. Then there are times where you have to help them, and some people might
Yep.
not have that philosophy, but I think practically like the idea of micromanaging, like no one will ever be micromanaged ever, and that's the future of work, is like totally unrealistic.
No, no, it's unrealistic, and I mean, I fully agree, Aram. It's with the AMP approach, should we say, you have to have the structure as well.
Totally.
So it is a bit of a grind, because at the end of the day, you're still holding yourself accountable to make sure that the results are there. But I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and like I'll say like the greatest amount of freedom that I've ever had professionally is when I went through like the most difficult period of my career. So when I was working as
Mhm.
a therapist, I didn't realize how good I had it. Like I worked at a like social services, so like I had to see 4 clients a day. That was our like you had minimum you saw is 4 clients. So each client you'd see for an
Mhm.
hour, and then you had an hour of follow up work on each client, and that would be like clinical planning, uh, session notes, and then research. So basically, I had 4 hours a day of just reading and writing, and then 4 hours a day of doing like therapeutic practice. And like,
Wow.
and I thought back then, and of course, like my pay was like connected to that, whereas like I really was not making with the social services, you're not making a ton of money. When I went into the corporate
Mhm.
world and I started working for this consulting firm, I was like, it was like getting like punched in the face. Like I could not believe how hard everyone worked. And not only how hard
Mhm.
everyone worked, how toxic the culture was where I was working. It was like everyone here is like a maniac. They're all like throwing each other under the bus and like
Yeah.
stealing sales from each other. And that like and
Mhm.
like my boss is breathing down my neck. He's like texting me on Sunday. And like if I don't respond, I'm gonna get threatened to get fired. It was crazy. But that work experience, I worked at this company for about 5.5 years. It actually made me such a better
Mhm.
professional, because not only did I have to figure out how to like up my performance, And it was terrible. And I don't want to sell the idea to anyone that like you can only get good by having bad experiences, because there's a lot of ways to get good. But like I worked for this company for 5.5 years, and it was seriously like the most intense experience. It was so toxic, it was so negative. But by the end of it, it set me up to start my own company where I now have the most amount of freedom. I would never,
Mhm.
ever, ever emulate the work culture they had there. Absolutely not. Like our company runs in like a 180 version of that. But I also
Mhm.
say in my desire to be so 180 to that, I've actually had lots of gaps in performance that I never addressed. Like a lot of stuff I let slide, a lot of opportunities I let go because I was trying too hard to go the other way.
Mhm.
And I think it's like
Yep.
to really create a great work experience for people and to be a really good leader, I think you got to like really understand the value of the grind and like working hard and
Mhm.
having a certain amount of pressure and a certain amount of expectation. And that's that like nuance of using a model like AMP or any of these things, recognizing that it's like,
Mhm.
no, you actually have to like really be on it and then help people thrive within that structure.
Yeah, that's right. I love what you're saying there, and it's also the balance as well. The fact that I've been in all in various situations with different types of management, right? The fact that I've had quite a few different jobs and been in different scenarios, some more toxic than others, has certainly informed, like, okay, what do I want my leadership style to be? Where did I feel really motivated, supported? Where did I want to really bring the absolute best version of me to the table? And in a way, I've used my own experiences there, just sort of being on the receiving end of different types of management styles to figure out what I think is right with my team. And then with my most recent role, running the Warner Music U program, thankfully I was basically given the keys to run my own shop. So I was able to create that culture that I wanted and also sort of make sure that my team were, functioning, performing, but then not necessarily being affected by too much stress, and I was very cognizant of the age group too, or the stage of the career that these young people were at, because most of them were still students. So, it's if I'm managing someone who's sort of like past entry level stage, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to the more sandbox environment that I was creating for my team, where it really was like failure is great because I know you're trying and effort is the important thing, but make sure you've got something to really show for it in the end. So I think it depends what your team looks like, how your team is formed, and also the extent that you have, like how much leeway do you have to actually set the tone and create an environment. So yeah, it's all super interesting, but I think at all times it's a balance, and the best approach is to tailor it as much as possible to the team that you have in front of you that you're leading.
Yeah. I love what you just said about like the sandbox approach. If people are like like really new, kind of fresh professionals versus people who have like had a bit more experience. And like that shift of it's like, oh, it's okay to fail versus it's okay to fail, but like, what's the return on that investment? Like something I hear a lot,
Mhm.
again, it's a bit of an online conversation. And I don't want to sound like I'm like poo-pooing people being like, oh, you should expect more out of your employer. Yeah. Like, I don't think anyone should have a shitty employer, but also, frankly, like most people are going to experience that at least at some point in their career. Most people have it either. It's like
Mhm.
you're working, I don't know, like at a convenience store, like early career, or you're working like high corporate world or in the social services. Most people will have some kind of bad experience, and it could be like small b bad, or it could be like huge bad. Um, but there is something to get out of most of those, not all of them, but most of those situations. But that idea of like when people talk a lot of this, like, oh, I always say it's like it's okay to fail. It's like, well, yeah, it's okay to fail, but it depends what we're talking about. Like you've got to anticipate, you got to anticipate people are gonna like. It's not okay to fail to show up to work. Like I need you to show up to work, but like failure of course is like a part of any business, but if someone fails and they fail about something dramatic and it's serious and it was like totally avoidable, that's different than if someone fails on something that was serious and it matters, but it was like unavoidable. Like those are two totally different things. And also it's like, what did you learn? What's the return on investment? Like what can we apply to the next thing? Failure is like, it's part of life. Like, I mean, of all things. And
Mhm.
I'm just I really encourage, not just on the podcast in general, people to kind of, I really would love to see more like reality coming back into the conversation about work, where it's like, yeah, work is actually really, really, really hard, and building a career is really, really hard. And all the stuff that you did in your career, like I hear how hard you've worked on it, and it's part of your story. And even if it's something you're super passionate about, it's hard. It's like super hard. It's supposed to be.
Yeah. No, fully agree. Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say one more thing about failure as well. Let's say if one of my team members came to me, something hadn't worked out, there would always be a question of, okay, we'd discuss it, we'd dissect it, and then I'd say, what do you think you'll do differently next time? And then if it happens again, then you're going to have a different conversation. And this
Totally.
is also like, from my teaching days as well. It's like, it's okay to make the mistake, but please learn from it and adjust accordingly.
Yeah. Uh, and again, it's like, as you're saying that, it's like you and I are like, well, yeah, of course. But at the same time, it's like, no, like really, like, what did you learn?
Yeah.
Like, what did you learn? How are you going to apply it next time? Um,
Hmm.
the conversation about work, for me, it's like, and I know for you as well, it's like, it's something you're in all the time. And I just really feel it's like, it benefits anyone who's running a business or is a leader or is like mentoring people to be like as practical as we can about like, work is supposed to be hard. Like it's supposed to be, not from a mean perspective, because anything that's worth doing, like anything that you're anything great that you're trying to do is going to require a lot of hard work and sacrifice and learning and sometimes taking it on the chin, all of those things. And it's worth it in the end, even if you like kind of fall flat on your face, it's worth it.
Hmm. Yes, I fully agree. And in fact, sometimes when you do fall flat on your face, again, that's like probably the best thing that happened that week because you've got something else to chew over to grow from. So,
Totally.
you got to kind of reframe these things as well.